Hi, I'm Dylan Byers.
And I'm Hadas Gold.
And this is On Media.
There's been a lot of discussion lately of the politics of this shutdown. But let's be clear, there are no winners here.
But the media sure didn't see it that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This argument that there are no winners is something that I think everybody would like to pretend they think because it makes you seem somewhat that you're taking this issue really seriously, that is really about the American people. In fact, in terms of politics, there are winners. And I think if you look at the media coverage,
and the poll numbers.
And the poll numbers, and you look at whether it's our own coverage here at Politico, you look at the New York Times, you look at the Washington Post, I think there's a clear analysis that, Obama actually came out the victor here. The Republicans, certainly the Ted Cruz, and that faction are certainly on their heels, whereas there are like some gains and some losses for guys like Mitch McConnell, guys like Boehner. There is like Jill Abramson, executive editor of the New York Times, is out there saying, there weren't any winners and we shouldn't be so focused on the winners and losers. And yet, lo and behold, in her own paper, it's like, no, Obama won, Republicans lost, that sort of thing. I don't know, there's kind of a weird tension there.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the media's desire to help make the story readable and relatable to the audience. And it's really hard for the audience to understand the complexities of politics in Washington. And it's honestly a lot easier and sometimes tells the story in a clearer fashion when you say, this is what happened in the end, number one, number two,
right.
The end.
And I wouldn't underestimate the desire for Americans to actually know who won and who lost here. It's certainly been good for news organizations.
Right.
There's been a spike in ratings, or at least there was a spike in ratings towards the end.
Yeah, so in the last final hours of the government shutdown, as the votes were coming to the House floor, as the president was making a speech and signing the bill, cable news networks saw a huge spike. Around 5 million people tuned in, but it just shows that Americans were really interested in what was happening in the final hours.
And an interesting thing on that note, this is going to surprise some viewers, but there are some of us in Washington who have a couple friends outside of the Beltway, just a few. And when you actually talk to those people who are not following politics day in, day out, really don't care about this stuff, what's very interesting is that as grueling and kind of boring as the shutdown can seem, at least from people I talk to back at home where I'm from, friends who up in other parts of the country, they're saying this is the moment I tuned in. This is when I started really caring about politics, because it just shocked me that our government could actually shut down, and all of a sudden they're visiting Politico multiple times a day, visiting New York Times multiple times a day, turning on CNN, that sort of thing.
All of us need to stop focusing on the lobbyists and the bloggers and the talking heads on radio and the professional activists who profit from conflict, and focus on what the majority of Americans sent us here to do.
You will always see in American politics a effort to go after the media as kind of being superficial in its coverage, or trying to drum up controversy. And it's a way of separating yourself from all of that and trying to rise above it. Now, at the same time, it's also this idea that Republicans are so scared about how they are going to be portrayed by those influential voices on the right, and believe me, the right has far more of these influential media players than the left does.
And a bigger audience.
And a far bigger audience. And it's a way of basically saying that you need to tune those people out because they are the cause of this divisive thing going on in our country. Now, it's really what I found interesting is the bloggers line, because who he's referring to when he says bloggers is interesting. Shortly after that speech, he had a meeting with some journalists who could be called bloggers. He had a meeting with Josh Barrow of Business Insider, with Jonathan Chait of New York Magazine. I believe Ezra Klein was there. We're still trying to confirm that. But it's sort of weird to hit out at bloggers en masse and then invite some of them in for a private meeting.
Glenn Greenwald, famous for helping to publicize the Edward Snowden leaks, found a very wealthy investor in the eBay founder.
Right. This is amazing. It's yet another example shortly on the heels of Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post. And in fact, Pierre Omidyar had been approached about buying the Washington Post. And he's throwing this money behind Greenwald.
And it's the same amount of money that Bezos bought the
right.
Washington Post for.
Which is fascinating, because it's one thing to buy a legacy media organization like the Washington Post and throw your money behind it. And there's a whole kind of infrastructure and establishment there. It's a whole other thing to just take Greenwald, a journalist who lives in Rio de Janeiro, and he's kind of bringing over some of his buddies who are also good journalists, and just throwing this money behind this project. Now, this is the this is the sunshine on the horizon for the dark days that journalism is going through, is that there are all these very wealthy tech players, primarily out on the West Coast, who have all this money. And Jack Schafer at Reuters wrote a very smart piece. If you are one of those people who has billions of dollars, the way that you kind of separate yourself, the way you get yourself into the conversation, kind of elevate yourself above the rest, is you join this class of people who own media properties. And at the end of the day, if you have the $8.5 billion that Omidyar has, it doesn't really affect your bottom line to throw $250 million at a media project.
So we learned last week that Bill Weir moved from ABC's Nightline over to CNN, and there were rumors that he was going to get a show in the 9 p.m. hour, which potentially would mean the end of Piers Morgan. What's the story behind that?
Right, so this move was like, okay, you're Bill Weir, you're a primetime host, you're not going to move to CNN and start hosting a show at 4 p.m., at midnight or anything like that. So what's going on here, and whose position are you going to take? And then these rumors started that Bill Weir had been telling colleagues at ABC that he was going to have a show in the 9 p.m. hour, which is Piers Morgan's hour. So there were these reports that Piers Morgan is going to be out at CNN. It's very complicated to say what's actually going on. Based off of the sources that we've spoken with, what's really happening is you have Bill Weir coming over to CNN, and he is going to have a big role there in prime time. That is true. He was not brought over specifically to replace Piers Morgan. Now, at the same time, if you're CNN and you're Jeff Zucker, you're trying out a lot of things. You're throwing a lot of stuff against the wall. You're seeing what works. You're seeing what doesn't work. Right now, you look at Piers Morgan's ratings. Is he working? Well, I don't know. If you're Jeff Zucker, you think maybe I can do better. I don't see Piers Morgan moving anytime soon. I don't see Bill Weir moving into the 9 p.m. hour, next week or anything like that. I do think there's a question, okay, what is Piers Morgan's future? Where do we fit in Bill Weir in prime time? And that's something that still has to be worked out. So I just think on that front, contrary to what you read, there's still a lot of stuff up in the air. So I'm Dylan Byers.
And I'm Hadas Gold.
And this was On Media. For these and other stories, you can check out our blog at politico.com.